Hi, I'm Liz.
And I'm Rhea.
Welcome to Karma's My Bitch, a podcast about love,
sex,
connection,
abundance,
joy,
purpose,
peace,
and how life isn't simply the stories we tell ourselves. Final episode of season 12, final episode of the magic season.
And I was saying, just as we were pressing record, I was like, I don't even remember when we started recording this season. Like, it just feels like we were just dropped into an entirely different time space.
What has been the purpose of this season, now that we're at the end? Personally, professionally, and for our listeners.
To share the fundamentals of magic, to put it all on record, so it's out there.
Our name, obviously, the reason why we're talking about magic also is that our name is KMB, which for a while was just Karma's My Bitch. But we kept calling it KMB. And then we went through this whole big rigmarole of trying to name our parent company. And I kept saying to you, Liz, we keep calling it KMB. I think it's KMB. You were like, no. And I was like, well, Liz is the psychic. So if she says no, it must be true. But then I was right.
we were both right because it wasn't KMB, and then it went, but it was because it was Karma Magic Bliss.
Exactly. So yesterday was Karma, so we did the Karma book first. Magic is what we're doing today, and tomorrow Bliss, and we've covered all of that. Mostly in the season I found the most boring, season 11, because it was the container for all our work, right? So we've covered the spectrum of the three essentials through our work. I mean, we talk a little bit about bliss in the magic books, one would assume. We talk a little bit about magic in the karma books. You know, one doesn't stop and the other one starts. It's always kind of like, you know.
Yes, they always have to get woven in different ways because they're not so much layered as they build on each other.
Exactly. And you don't turn around and one day to the next you're in an entirely new reality. Everything builds.
Yeah.
So everything's world building. But today, for some reason, you have put on this outline that we're talking about hate. So I'm going to ask you,
with
WTF.
triple X. I know.
Yeah, what the fuck? Why are we talking about hate?
I don't know. I honestly, when this came through, I was like, we just recorded an episode about the kids and hope and now time and the new template for the new world and whatever that means, and an entire season on magic and being the divine, that I'm like, oh, now we have to talk about hate in the very last episode. And then I thought, oh my God, Rhea's going to say I'm going to be Debbie Downing this, and then she's going to make fun of me again. And
yeah, all those things are true. So why? So let's ask them why? Because
this episode is what's next. What are we going to be contending with? As magical beings, as karmaless beings, what is out there that still has to be dealt with as we expand our consciousness? And what we don't do, as much as it seems like I'm not going to say we, I Debbie down a lot. And I'm like, okay, but
thank you for removing me from that.
Exactly. I do my best. The reality is that I'm not ever going to be... still saying the spiritual person that is always going to blow sunshine up people's asses and lie and say everything is going to come up roses from here on out. Expanding consciousness means we need growth opportunities to enable our evolution. It doesn't mean, though, that those challenges come up the same way that they do your karma, but it doesn't mean that everything is smooth sailing, but it is smooth sailing for the most part. You just have to learn, and you fortify in a way in which you are always in your power and you can manage those challenges. But at the same time, I think it's a lie to say that the world is going to get a gazillion times better. Like, I just will always be the honest one. For me, I've always had to temper a lot of things that come up with, but this is the reality. There's your reality, which is healed and whole, and you can move forward and have your rainbows and unicorns as you wish. But there's also a world in which hate still exists. And so as you come through the end of magic, in which you can see that you're capable of so much, that you're that powerful, that you are the divine, what's next is now you have to really contend with a world that still holds fear.
But your world doesn't hold fear.
No, but a world, the world in which
I know.
you
I'm just
live.
saying it for like our listeners.
Oh, okay.
Because if you're the Debbie Downer, I'm not.
I don't want to be. Fuck
no,
off.
It's fair. But it's fair because
who's
I think
the one that like wah-wahs a lot though? The funny
I know, but that's
thing
the thing.
is that
That's what
you.
it is. Because that's the thing. I feel like I'm actually quite naturally cynical.
Yeah. I mean, as am I think.
But like in the sense, and that's why I always like my brain goes to, all right, well, let's actually paint the picture here, which is the world, yes, and we're going to talk about that now. But if you are in a space of magic, it means you are in your power. It means you are in a 5D space where you are able to create your life. And it also means that within your relationships, people match you to some degree or another.
Yes.
So we're not saying, when we're talking about things being smooth or not smooth, we're not talking about necessarily your life. It's how do you protect what's sacred?
Well, you don't have to protect anything. It's what you continue to hold.
Better
because you stay in flow, right? Because protection immediately puts up barriers.
Yeah.
And there's no need to. It's what you can maintain and what you can hold.
Exactly. So whilst the world, it's a little bit like, and it's funny because I heard this song a lot in my head, but it's a little bit like slow dancing in a burning room. Right? Like you can have the most beautiful, sensual, amazing dance. The room might be burning down. Are you going to keep dancing? Or are you going to try and put out the fire?
I mean, I just have Love in This Club in my head, so...
Oh, why?
I don't. It came on in my shuffle this morning.
But
so
it's
now
true
I've got
because,
Usher in my head.
Because I have to say that when I think about, you know, we spoke about this a bit in season 11. I can't believe I've referenced it twice now. Must be because it's really like over enough that I can face it. But, you know, when I think about my first forays into being a magical being at all, the world was burning down.
Still burning down.
And then we've seen one after another these tent poles of separation, as we discuss in Karmic Adventure, falling down around us. Yeah. And we're seeing all just like, and you've always said this, and and it's why I love relationships so much. Because I do think if you can understand yourself and you can understand your relationships in the immediate, like your personal relationships, you can start understanding everything else because everything's relational. So once you've done your work, right, and you've become this whole healed magical being, your relationships improve. Before that happens, everything's really fucking rocky because all the shit that you've been holding on to that were stopping you from being this whole healed magical being has to be witnessed. And as you described at the end of Karmic Attraction, we have to bear witness to all the ways in which we've been separate from ourselves and each other. But as we've also discussed, once you do it on a personal level, you then do it on a more global level, because that's when you're able to really see what's going on.
Yeah.
Things might look the same, but you can see what's actually going on. And
I mean, it could even just be in a community level, like
yeah. It doesn't have to be global.
Societal
but with, like
level.
social media and news and everything else, it can be so much bigger now that you can really see how the other form of power has kept us unempowered and what people will do for that. Right? Yeah. And it's awful to watch.
It is.
But when I see that, well, it's time for us to see what it's like on a global scale, whilst it's time for me to keep holding space for what I know to be possible on a personal level, because that's how it translates into a global scale, which is why we spoke about the children in the last episode, because it really is about laying those foundations. Yeah. So that just as much as there are people out there who are still playing through this shit on a larger scale, and people being affected by it on a very personal level, and just about how we were talking about how you go from karma to magic to bliss, it's constantly well building, right? Like one ends as one begins. Yeah. That's the same for consciousness. So just as we're watching the way in which we've managed our worlds politically, economically, through religion, all three are falling, we have to be the ones to hold what comes next. Yes. And those children will be the ones who help us do it.
Well, and the job was to bring those tent poles down, so the younger generations had something to build from.
But how do you bring the tent poles down? By unplugging from them.
Yeah, exactly. To not feed into the power anymore. To not give over our power, which is why we are all about empowerment. So separation is our ability to separate from our divine selves, to say I and God are not one. But a soul can only exist in separation for so long before it begins to deteriorate. If, for lack of a better word, there is definitely a better word, but I'm not going to go into it. Because we always need that divine connection. So that is why our time away from the divine, or our time apart, or our time in separation has to be so temporary. Because the longer we exist in separation, the more it hurts us at a soul level. Now, part of the whole experience of separation is otherness. Can I exist as something else, as someone else? And that's been the beauty, is just being able to be embodied in different ways at different times. And that allows for that sort of free will to be exercised. If I'm in this body, let me try this. And we have all of those opportunities ahead of us. Now, what happened over time was separation took its toll to such a degree that I'm not going to go into the history of it, but now we have these tent poles around which our societies are organized. And over generations, these tent poles got stronger as we became more disempowered, because our power got fed rather into our individual experiences here on earth. They were fed into these tent poles. And those tent poles, to be able to maintain their power, held up this idea of otherness and separation to such a degree that we lost sight of our identities, not just our divine identities, but our power identities, our individual identities. Everything became about patriotism, nationalism. So that way we identified with the larger whole, and we continue to lose sight of ourselves more and more. Then that core fear, which is why karma comes in, is I am not good enough. As in, I'm going to remain in this disempowered state because I cannot be my God self. I will never be God enough. And that's where our slave mentality comes in. Am I ever going to be free again? If not, then I might as well just give up now. So all of that giving up, all that disempowerment feeds the temples, feeds the temples. And as long as we're living and breathing, as long as we're in body, there is desire. There's at a minimum motivation. You and I spoke about the difference between drive and motivation. There is the motivation to try. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in body. So there is an inherent desire for freedom and to get there. But many of us, from generations, lifetimes, conditioning, etc., how far it seems to be away from us, or how long it might take us to get there, could sort of be our immediate defeat or not. So while we're trying to unpick and, as you say, untangle ourselves from those stories, from those tent poles that, as we see, have been playing out for a long, long time to maintain their autonomy, if you will, right? Their capacity to operate at our expense. We're constantly seeing that otherness come up and come up. And so we've been having to contend with separation because we've been living in separation. One cannot say, well, this has just been immediate. This has just been ongoing, and we've been waking up to it slowly. And that's why consciousness is a slow process, because you cannot wake up to all this at once. You just kind of self-destruct because it's a lot. More on that in Adventure. But what we're going to be seeing, and the reason why we have to talk about what's next, is we have to really understand what is underscoring a lot of what has been coming up since 2024 and what has continued, which is hate. And what underpins hate is fear.
So it's not polarity or judgment.
It's not. But we have to see fear in a way in which, so fear, and our core fear is I am not good enough when we're in our karma. The fear that is underpinning this hate, which one might say, given global events, okay, you fear what you can't understand, or there's some xenophobia which you cannot connect to, which xenophobia is just born from ignorance, right? I cannot see myself in you. But the hate, and this is what I thought was really interesting, was as they explained it, this hate is born from the fear that I am not you, and therefore I do not know myself.
It's the opposite of oneness. Yeah, no, it makes sense to me, weirdly.
I am that separate. I have gone that far outside of myself. I have pretty much left the building and left myself behind. It's quite extreme, but that's the hate we're contending with now.
So it's not something that people who've been doing the karmic undoing process can experience?
No, but they can certainly be sensitive to. If we're holding something or another in hate, it's that direct contrast to love, which is effectively your MO, right? So if we're shining our light in love and swimming in all that divinity that we're pouring into the world, with hate, we're diminishing our light as we breathe. If breath is life force and we breathe our light in love. Hate is the contraction of that breath. So we give nothing, but we just continuously contract our light.
So it's a bit like when I'm in love, right? Or when I'm just being me now in any way, it's like I can see myself in everyone. If I'm connected to God, I am God, God consciousness, all that stuff, that means everyone else is too. But if I'm so separate from myself that I don't know that, it's not the darkness as you were fearing it was, it's the absence of love. I guess the more we hate and the more we see someone as the opposite of us, the more we further disconnect from our own light because we undermine it.
We deny it. We deny it. The darker we become, as in we no longer have light to source and be sourced from. And so we keep blocking it with our contracting light.
But it's also like, you know, when you're like really in a hateful place, and I've definitely had this experience with like arguments with people when they're like really fucking angry and they're like hating me or hating my life or like hating themselves, all the things. And I can throw as much light into that. I understand you. I'm with you. I love you. It's almost like their anger and hate renders my light useless.
It does.
It's a bit like that, I guess.
I mean, anger itself is not bad.
No, and we've spoken about this in season 2. Anger is will. It's actually quite a healthy thing to do because if you're angry, then you can see what you want, and will breeds clarity and all the rest. Like sometimes when I'm angry, I just think, what do I want? What is this showing?
There's power behind that. There's power behind that, which means there's light.
Yeah.
It might be a bit distorted depending on the source of it, but who knows? But it's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, when you're arguing with somebody, it may not be hate that's really coming up, but fear.
So hate is basically fear on crack.
Can be, yeah. Well, yeah. And again, we do have those types of fear where we have that ignorance, like xenophobia and stuff. But this kind of hate is, I mean, they kind of capitalized it. So it's a big one. It's a big one, which tells me then it's encapsulating all that deep-rooted fear of many lifetimes. So it was interesting, you know, for a few years now, that's been kind of coming up, like in this kind of, whatever you called it, ascension process or the move to 2024 and, you know, this foundation building, blah, blah, blah. The thing that we'd have to contend with was all the dark coming up, all the dark from life and separation. And they kept calling it, it's the dark that you have to contend with. It's all whatever. But the one thing that they never said was hate. And I had to sit there and I had to wonder, why are we calling it this now? Why are we talking about it in this context versus the other context? Separation effectively stokes hate because the more darkness there is, as in extreme otherness, it gets something to feed off of. It gives its purpose. And when you have that, it gives it some reason to exist. And this is where our greatest challenge comes in. And this is why this episode is actually really significant as the ultimate final episode of this season with magic. And you touched upon it when you made the association between distorted fear and as hate can really fuck up magic. And that's because this is going to be the greatest challenge for your generation, Rhea, and the ones to come, is how does one live in a world filled with hate? How can you be your most magical, divine, karmaless self in a world in which hate is going to be front and center for the next several years?
Well, I don't know, Liz.
First of all, everything is a function of source. Everything is an expression of source. So the divine exists in all things.
So there's always a bit of light and even in the darkness.
Yes, because the dark was light at one point.
That means it can always be back to light again.
I
can't believe this is the episode we finish on.
I mean, honestly, we're going to find high notes. But
Listen,
it is...
No, but it's important because I just think about like my experiences of magic and the world, and it got really, because I feel like the more scared I got or the more I allowed my love to stop shining as brightly, the more it overwhelmed me.
Because
is that a good way of saying it?
So it's anathema to the soul to exist in darkness. It doesn't feel right. But if we're really at a place of separation within ourselves, it's not going to necessarily feel wrong. You only start to sense something is off because the more whole you are inside. So for the average person who might have just been fine and comfortable and coping in separation, it may not feel like much worse.
Or any worse.
So for them to be eaten up by the darkness, it might just be kind of like a slow de-evolution. And that's how you kind of get to the darkness scale, if you will. So since 2018, we've just been seeing this rise in hate, right? Because we're really trying to process all the unprocessed and unseen darkness that's been held within many people.
It's like the
in many places. Machine. Exactly. So a lot of it's just repressed or suppressed.
And can I just throw out there, and some of it's been co-opted by spirituality in a really fucked up way, where they don't even notice that it's dark, and then they've been like hurting more people because people don't know what they're playing in, and people don't realize what it means to be open, and people don't realize what light actually is and how powerful it can be when it's sourced properly, but how playing in this, sometimes we can misunderstand power and think it's something very spiritual, and it can really hurt people.
Yeah.
And it's awful.
Most people will say they'll still do the week in Costa Rica and see if they can bypass or shortcut or hack their spiritual growth and evolution.
But then what
happens, as opposed to going, yeah, exactly.
You unleash the dark within until it just can fuck everything up.
Yeah. And then it kind of creates a bigger mess to clean up, let me tell you. They burn themselves out to such a degree that they can't even be a productive soul here on earth. Or they'll turn away from themselves out of fear of their own power because they made that one choice that hurt them. So clawing back from that is hard. It's harder than saying, you know what, maybe I'll just go the route of fucking up and, leaning into my karma and finding it in that process. Let me tell you, playing in the dark is a lot harder to come back from than playing in your karmic undoing process.
It doesn't have to be like big or lofty or some kind of sci-fi movie. It's if you have a lot of shit that you've not processed or acknowledged, and you go somewhere and you release it, or you simply become aware of it, there's a reason why the karmic undoing process is a process, and it's step by step. It will overwhelm us to see it all at once. We will want to destroy everything, including ourselves.
Yes.
And it's just not worth it. We're not here to learn how much we can destroy. We're here to learn how much we can create.
Yes.
And those are actually very different things. And that's why I love the karmic undoing process, and what love is a strong word, but why I also love magic, and maybe one day I'll love bliss. But it's because we don't teach people to destroy their karma. We teach, how did you create this? So how can you create something different?
Yeah.
That's a very loving way, right?
Yeah.
It's all very empowering. It comes from a place of divinity. It comes from a place of heart. As I said, the worst wasn't as bad as I thought it was, and the great could be greater. Mm. We teach it from creation perspective. That's what all our books are about when we talk about karma. And when we talk about magic, it's just more creation. It's not about destroying. But when we go to those places, it is literally only about destroying.
Yeah.
Destroying what is good in our lives, destroying what is good about us, destroying what is good in our world.
Yes. And
no one's creating anything. You're destroying, and that's when you get the charred remains of unrealized potential.
Absolutely. And it sucks. It sucks, the big one, because we're really going to have to find ways of releasing that darkness from that core of our being, or we're just going to continue to be forced to bear witness. Facing our shadow selves is not the same as playing in the dark.
And as Ellen once said, understand that. As Ellen once said, if anything feels remotely not right, listen, walk the fuck away.
Yes.
Every time.
Yeah. And that's why we've had to have those episodes about superstition. Mm-hmm. Because superstition keeps us locked, if not in fear, then in doubt. Mm-hmm. And the longer we hold on to those things, the more disempowered we become, or we just remain in that state of disempowerment. As in, we really can't fully climb out of it as long as we're holding on to those dregs or threads that keep us tied to those old beliefs.
And what's interesting, I would argue, when it comes to superstition, planetary alignments, all this stuff, is that it shows that we do have on some level an understanding that this shit exists, Otherwise, we wouldn't need any of that.
It does. And that's really important to acknowledge as we move on. Right? It's kind of like, I know that that's in my history. I know my culture loves having forks and spoons hanging on the wall, so we'll always have food in the house. Like, I can acknowledge that. It doesn't mean I have to have one on my wall, but there is just going to be this like massive global dumping of darkness.
Yeah, well, it needs to. If we're reaching the consciousness scale required for 5D and we're all going into the light, even though we may assume we've seen all there is to see, there's been millennia of separation. So
for the individual, the best thing to do is this focus on capital L love. To not save the world, but to save themselves. Because the more light you shine, the less it gives space for the dark. Now, we don't say this as an antidote to the dark, but we say it as it can heal the dark.
That's so nice. I did not know that. Oh, love is really multifaceted.
Yes. So glad we're going to end this episode in a way that's going to make you feel good. Yay.
I did not know that. Oh, love is cool.
And so this karmic undoing process shows us that we have enough light that can withstand the dark. So there really isn't anything that needs to be done except hold up all that love, right? So you love, you hold, and you acknowledge. That's the more divine you are and the more of the divine you become, as in you remember yourself, you can get and start to strive toward bliss, which means you're unbending in your purpose and joy in your life. If you can get to love, capital L love, in yourself, you'll have done most of the work.
And then once you're fully embedded in it and clear, nothing can harm you anyway.
Right. That's where you can really start toward bliss. Thank you for listening. For more information, articles, and inspiration, find us at karmasmybitch.com and at karmasmybitch.insta.
And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review.